The subject of today's discussion is the so-called student rebellion at Columbia University. In an editorial on April 25, 1968, the New York Times, with which I seldom agree, but do agree in this particular instance, has characterized that rebellion as hoodlumism at Columbia. I quote, "The destructive minority of students at Columbia University, along with their not-so-friendly allies among community militants, have offered a degrading spectacle of hoodlum tactics, the exaltation of irresponsibility over reason." Close quote. And further, quote, "That demonstration merely underscores the intolerably undemocratic nature of dictatorial student minorities at Columbia and elsewhere, who undermine academic freedom and the free society itself by resorting to such junta methods as wrecking the university president's office and holding administrators and trustees as hostages." Close quote. Since that demonstration was staged allegedly in defense of minority rights, I will devote my broadcast today to another different kind of minority at Columbia University and give their voice an opportunity to be heard. They are a group of Columbia students called Committee for Defense of Property Rights. They are probably a very small minority at present, but they deserve to be heard because they speak in the name of two principles which are unusual in today's context: reason and morality. On April 26, 1968, the Committee for the Defense of Property Rights sent a letter to Grayson Kirk, president of Columbia University. On April 29th, that letter was reprinted in the Columbia Daily Spectator. I shall quote that letter in full. Quote, "Dear President Kirk, a year ago, in response to the forcible occupation of Dodge Hall by a gang of SDS, Students for Democratic Society, demonstrators, we sent you a copy of a pamphlet. In this, we recommended that no leniency be granted to the 16 Columbia students who took part in the occupation of Dodge Hall, that those of them who are first offenders be suspended for at least a year, that those who have been guilty of similar coercive acts in the past and those who repeat such acts in the future be unconditionally and permanently expelled, that the university remove all sanction and support from the Students for a Democratic Society, prohibiting this group from claiming the status of a Columbia organization, from using university facilities, and from holding meetings of any kind on campus, and that any other group which espouses and employs physical force to achieve its goals be dealt with in the same manner, that the university henceforth make it a policy immediately and effectively to protect its students, guests, faculty, and administrators from coercive violence, that any future act such as the occupation of university property, the blocking of official procedures or ceremonies, or the disruption of classes through noise, threats, or force be stopped without hesitation and by whatever means are necessary, that in the future any such acts of violence be punished severely, and in the case of repeated offenses, punished by expulsion. In the same pamphlet, we warned, inside quote, if this program is rejected, if, for example, the 16 violators are given mere token sentences, such as short suspensions, this will be an ominous precedent for the future of Columbia as an institution of learning. The disruption of our lives and our studies will grow with every temporization, every acquiescence, every appeasement. Close quote, we predicted. If the principle and precedent of coercion is once established, such group as SDS will have no difficulty in bringing our university and our academic pursuits to a grinding, terrorized, Berkeley-style halt. Close inner quotes, and continuing the letter. Nevertheless, you chose the policy of appeasement. Only one of the demonstrators was given a long-term suspension. Shortly after the Dodge Hall incident, another university room was forcibly occupied, this time a room in which a class was being held. This went virtually unnoticed by the administration. SDS began to learn that coercion works on the Columbia campus. Later that year, the administration surrendered to half-veiled SDS threats of violence by canceling the recruitment interviews of the United States Army. Encouraged by the administration's continual temporization and conciliation, this year SDS announced that it was no longer merely going to protest, but was going to begin active resistance. The first step in this program was a deliberate mass violation of your rule against indoor demonstrations. Again, you failed to act. The violation went unpunished and unrecognized. SDS continued to expand the scope of its coercive tactics. The administration did nothing. Finally, after a second demonstration inside Law Library, the administration belatedly handed down token punishments, probation, for 7 of the hoodlums. SDS threatened to retaliate with a mass siege of Law Library. Your response was a last-minute act of appeasement. You announced that the university had acceded to the collectivist demand that Columbia dissolve its ties with the Institute for Defense Analysis. Finally, as SDS was actually massing for the siege, you made no attempt to stop them or to defend the university's property rights. Instead, you closed down the building. The entire campus and the entire nation have just witnessed the latest episode of mob rule at Columbia. Decent students were revolted to see university officials imprisoned, class schedules disrupted, and major university buildings occupied by brute force. Even more shocking, however, was the fact that you and other persons charged with supervision of university operations made no effort to stop the acts of false imprisonment, criminal trespass, and vandalism committed at Hamilton Hall. So far as observers could tell, when trouble started, the university's president, administration, and police went underground. Due to this complete sellout on the part of the authorities, the coercion quickly spread until the entire university was brought to a total halt. Appeasement does not work. It never has, and it never will. An eloquent demonstration of this principle is the sequence of events at the University of California at Berkeley. Due to the weak-kneed, hands-off policy of Governor Brown and the continual surrenders of University President Clark Kerr, Berkeley experienced the first of the campus rebellions. The criminal anarchists, through brute force, assumed virtual control and succeeded in enforcing their demands on the administration and the other students. Then Ronald Reagan, who promised investigation of the university and a tough policy against the rebels, was elected governor. No one is compelled to attend the university, Reagan pointed out. Those who do attend should accept and obey the prescribed rules, or pack up and get out. Clark Kerr was fired. Reagan demonstrated that he meant what he said about enforcing the rules. Since there have been increasing numbers of coercive takeovers at many campuses in the United States, but no more of them at Berkeley. Appeasement has failed at Columbia, as it failed at Berkeley, and as it always must fail. Every surrender has made the problem worse. Last year we were told that the administration was afraid to make martyrs by meting out stiff academic punishments to rule breakers. This year we are told that the administration is afraid to make martyrs by authorizing the use of tear gas and mace to break up a full-scale guerrilla occupation of university buildings. Who will be next year's potential martyrs? Arsonists? Murderers? Columbia University must have a president who can protect university property and maintain order on campus. Therefore, we urge you to resign so that such a president can be appointed. You have acted as if the issues at Columbia were actually defense projects and gymnasiums. The leftists know, if you do not, that the real choice is force versus individual rights at Columbia as throughout the entire world. Columbia University deserves an administration that will not sacrifice individual rights to force and intimidation by a minority of student delinquents. As first steps to the return of sanity at Columbia, we urge the following. 1. Appointment of a new president who is willing and able to maintain order at Columbia. 2. The identification, permanent expulsion, and criminal prosecution of the leaders of the demonstrations. 3. A truthful declaration that those who disrupt university functions will be expelled. 4. The expulsion of Students for a Democratic Society as a Columbia organization. America, like Germany in the 1930s, is moving rapidly toward the anarchical state in which private groups are able to impose their political dictates by physical force. The only possible result of such chaos, as in Germany, is collectivist dictatorship. The only policy that can stop this movement is uncompromising enforcement of the law, unwavering punishment of those who initiate the use of physical force, and intransigent protection of individual rights. Close quote. This letter to President Kirk was signed by Robert Masters, Graduate Faculty's Chairman, Lyle Morrell, Jr., School of Business Executive Vice Chairman, Howard A. Hood, School of Law, George B. Lyons, Graduate Faculties, Harry Binswanger, Graduate Faculties, George J. P. Jacobs, General Studies, Robert Knapp, Columbia College, Alan Godhelf, Graduate Faculties. This was the statement of the Committee for Defense of Property Rights at Columbia, which, to my knowledge, has not been quoted or mentioned prominently in the press, and yet which eminently deserves hearing and thinking about. On April 30th, the Committee for the Defense of Property Rights issued the following statement. It was issued at a press conference. Quote, the members of the Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, who have seized 5 buildings at Columbia University are today's version of the Nazi thugs who seized power in Germany in the 1930s. The tactics of the rebels, in principle, are those of Hitler's SA stormtroopers and of Himmler's SS. Systematic violation of individual rights and repeated appeal to the mass initiation of physical violence and coercive intimidation. The announced long-range purpose of the rebels is a collectivist society indistinguishable in principle from the fascist regimes of the 20th century. The alleged issues of the current demonstration, such as the location of Columbia's new gymnasium, do not explain the fanatical acts of the demonstrators. Their present goal, as the actions of SDS groups around the country testify, is the takeover of the universities. By attempting to establish the principle that the university campus is a sanctuary immune from police action, the student leftists aim to turn the campus into an enclave of lawlessness from which civil authorities are excluded. Then they will be free to terrorize their opponents, both on and off campus, with impunity, as in Latin America. If the rebels are permitted to seize the private property of a university without punishment, they can, by the same principle, seize political convention halls, newspaper offices, political party headquarters, and polling places. If they can enforce their dictates by attacking property with impunity, they can, by the same principle, attack persons. If they are permitted to hold a college dean captive with impunity, they can with equal justification hold political candidates and government officials captive. If police force cannot be used against extortionists and kidnappers today, it cannot be used tomorrow against organized stormtroopers. This was the method by which Germany succumbed to the rule by brute force in the 1930s. In America and in any free country, the police exists to protect individual rights, to safeguard life, liberty, and property against the use of physical force. To bar the police out of a fear of violence from performing their function is to destroy the one barrier a civilized nation has against uncontrolled violence and dictatorship. The rebels' demand for amnesty is the most urgent issue in the present Colombia crisis. Their demand for amnesty is the demand for abdication of legal authority. If amnesty is granted in any form, society will have given the rebels an engraved invitation to escalate their demands ceaselessly. Amnesty will serve as an explicit sanction for future acts of force and violence. The appeasement of the SA and SS troops by the Weimar Republic and the appeasement of the Nazi imperialism by Chamberlain and Daladier led inexorably to consequences with which we are all familiar. The Colombia rebels' demand for amnesty is an attempt to institutionalize such appeasement as a principle of civil policy in this country. The members of this committee, therefore, call for strict enforcement of the law at Colombia by prosecuting the rebel leaders for the crimes they have committed: vandalism, criminal trespass, coercion, extortion, and unlawful imprisonment. We call for a complete reversal of the present administration policy. These are the steps that must be taken. 1. The replacement of Grayson Kirk by a president who can maintain order at Colombia. 2. The immediate arrest, expulsion, and criminal prosecution of the leaders of the disruption. 3. A firm policy declaration by the administration that those who attempt to disrupt university functions in the future will be arrested and expelled. 4. The abolition of Students for a Democratic Society at Columbia. Close quote. This was a press conference statement made on April 30th by the Committee for Defense of Property Rights at Columbia University, an organization of students at Columbia. Now, one can obviously see that this small and very brave minority of students are defenders of individual rights and, indirectly, of course, of capitalism. This exactly is not the position of the New York Times. But observe that the present situation at Columbia was too much even for the liberal New York Times. Apart from the editorial I first quoted, the Times devoted 2 more editorials to the situation at Columbia. On April 26, the New York Times said editorially, quote, "In society as in physics, actions tend to produce reactions. Those American students of the left who choose to disregard the law and violate the rights of others to impose their own will are inviting counter-violence and counter-illegality from the forces of the right. Fascism of the left raises the specter of fascism of the right, and either or both would bury freedom. Close quote. It is very important for all those concerned with the situation to realize that fascism is the political system's thought by the so-called New Left. Fascism, specifically, not socialism or welfare statism, not even communism. On April 29th, the New York Times said in an editorial the following, I quote, "It was apparent from the start that the useful junta, which has substituted dictatorship by temper tantrum for undergraduate democracy, neither cared about nor has received support from the majority of students. That isolated it from even the shadow of moral right to demand amnesty for its irresponsibility. To grant such blanket absolution would be to put Columbia and every other educational institution at the mercy of any power group bent on scuttling government by reason and law." Close quote. And further, quote, "Control of a campus cannot be turned over to student juntas operating in defiance of every consideration of academic discipline and democratic rule. This is the issue on which Columbia has rightly decided it cannot surrender." Close quote. I should like to express the hope that Columbia, in fact, will not surrender. But as of today, the situation is not very hopeful. When the hoodlums were expelled from the buildings they occupied, a great many formerly neutral students and, what is worse, faculty members rallied to the support of the arrested or dispossessed rebels in protest against the university's use of the police. This seems to indicate that some form or another of compromise will ultimately disgrace Columbia further, and that the thugs and hoodlums who were trying to impose their will by force are going to be let off or whitewashed in some manner. I hope that this will not be so, but at present such are the indications. It is obvious, of course, that the only issue involved at Columbia is the attempt to establish force as a proper means of political action. Brute physical force, not even by majorities, which of course would be equally inexcusable, but force by violent minorities who expect to gain their ends by the default, the appeasement, and the cowardice of the authorities in question and of the indifferent majorities. In 1965, I wrote an article on the rebellion at Berkeley University entitled "The Cashing In, the Student Rebellion." It was published in the July, August, and September 1965 issues of the then Objectivist newsletter. Those interested in this article today will find it reprinted in my book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. I analyzed the ideological and social roots and meaning of the Berkeley Rebellion, and I predicted that that rebellion was only the beginning of a long campaign in which the students would be used as a trial balloon to test out the possibilities of a political coup, a political seizure of power by force. Who was using them? A number of statist collectivist groups who may have differed in their membership but who had one goal in common: the destruction of the last elements of freedom and capitalism in America. In this article of mine in 1965, I stated the following principles. Quote, "This was the main ideological purpose of the student rebellion's leaders, whoever they were, to condition the country to accept force as the means of settling political controversies. And for its motley leftist leadership, the student rebellion is a trial balloon, a kind of cultural temperature taking. It is a test of how much they can get away with and what sort of opposition they will encounter." And further, if the universities, the supposed citadels of reason, knowledge, scholarship, civilization, can be made to surrender to the rule of brute force, the rest of the country is cooked. Close quote. I do not believe that this country would accept the rule of brute force, but that the attempt is being made, that the collectivists, in despair because they have failed ideologically and are no longer an ideological influence, are now resorting to the last attempt, the attempt to take over by force, that is the trend of the moment is becoming clearer and clearer. It is now obvious. And it is up to the so-called neutrals and the so-called, very much miscalled, intellectuals of such institutions as Columbia to realize what the meaning of this trend actually is. No, it is true that the collectivists and statists will not get away with a dictatorship in America as they have got away with it in most countries of Europe. America has too long a history of individual freedom, too clear a base of individual rights to bow down like the serfs of Russia or Germany. But it would be impossible to predict and horrifying to project what kind of violence would take place here in America in the attempt to seize government by force. The pattern is certainly following the precedent of Europe, particularly of Nazi Germany. Let us hope that enough people will observe the trend and stop it in principle and at its roots in time.